Hello friends, this is video number 3 and it will span the years of 2009 through 2013. If you had a chance to make it through that rather lengthy video number 2, that was where I described the actual information that I'm holding and that I'm now releasing for my own freedom and for my kids and for seekers to be aware of certain pitfalls that might exist in certain teachings. So in 2009, I was still at this organization. Oh, and I will not be using names still. There were a handful, actually a significant number of people that were sent to me. And so I will not be revealing their names as well. For the astute person who's been involved in the spiritual scene for some time, these folks might be readily apparent anyway. And in many ways, it's those folks who do know, they're actually the people, some of which, to whom I'm addressing these videos. So in 2009, I'm still with this organization, still marginalized, and people are waking up and looking aghast at what I've been holding for the past several years. Which was a really good thing for me with regard to a relief as people were waking up. Remember this one woman, a dear friend at this organization, who slid me the word trust. And while trust has always been a deep part of my practice, it doesn't belie the deceptions that I was forced to hold. So these next few videos are going to be revealing the folks that came along that actually upheld those deceptions. It's one of the main aspects of what some circles call a Wetiko virus or a deceptive virus, is that it has to be maintained. And if you're in high-level teachings, at some point that deceptive virus has to come to an end. I don't really have anything else to say on that issue because it's, in many ways, in my own heart and mind, it's a moot point. It does have to come to an end. So, why did I go along with the deceptions of the folks that were sent? Were several-fold. For one, I was still operating within the spiritual authority framework, that folks were awake and I wasn't. And so I felt like I had to take their word for it. That was number one. And number two, I felt powerless against what I knew to be very high-level siddha power, or for those who don't know the term, psychic powers that really aren't bound in time and space or form in any way. Many have never experienced that, and I can understand not understanding it if that's the case. But it is a fact, psychic powers do exist. And in some cases, depending on who's involved, they can wield immense power in control. And the third reason was that I didn't trust my gut with regard to being lied to. I certainly felt it. I've always been sensitive in that way since I came on this planet. It's one of the big drawbacks of the not the body teachings, is that when something presents itself to you, your body feels it first and foremost in its truth or in its untruth. And although I was not expressing it, when I knew people were lying to me, I was definitely feeling it. So there were two key quotes before I left this organization. Each was said by each of the teachers. The Chan teacher told me that I would fall through the cracks. He said those were his words in a counseling session. And as I mentioned in the previous video, those cracks would not have existed without the deceptions and lies. The lies were the cracks. So that was the first key quote. The second key quote was by the Advaita teacher. Right before I left, he indicated by saying, the hardest thing for you will be to not be able to be in a relationship. He actually said that to me. Whether it's silence or in words, it was said. Looking back, I'm amazed that a teacher would actually do that via various controls. But there was a teaching and there was an organization to upkeep. So those two statements set the groundwork for what would come afterwards with regard to people being sent to me. Before leaving the organization, I came in contact with several bloggers. This is pretty new at the time. It was probably about 2009. And the bloggers appeared awake to me. And I also noticed that their words were being woven into the different satsang talks. So that was fascinating in itself. One of the bloggers encouraged me at the time to join Facebook, and because there was some resistance, she gently encouraged me by throwing me a handful of what I now look back and see as fairly carefully picked friends. And yet I am deeply grateful to her. And so that's how I ended up entering the golden halls, as one of the early Facebook friends called it. I'm referring to notes again still because this is, as you know, very complex. Shortly before I left the organization, also, I ran across a young teacher from Europe. I was completely enthralled with this teacher, not only from his obvious brilliance, and incredible ability with the English language, but a real deep clarity, and loads of fun. So I sort of stalked him on Facebook, meaning I paid attention to everything that he was writing. And ultimately, when he first came to the States, he ended up staying with me for several weeks. And during those several weeks, that authority stuff was still in full bloom in me, and also the necessity to take an authority's words as a certain kind of standard. But one of the things I love the most about this teacher, or this blooming teacher, was his insistence that teachings should be efficient. Now, after coming out of close to 20 years, I really appreciated that. And there was a real lightness about what was presented that was also very liberating. There was a lightness that was combined with really empowering people, giving them confidence that their own true nature could be easily realized. So I really welcomed him as a true breath of fresh air. And for that time, still, I'm deeply grateful. Although I don't follow this teacher's teachings anymore, I go with the sound of the chimes outside instead. Nonetheless, I appreciated him. At the time, I was still at a community college, and there was a person there who was from the organization, who also worked there, and he had to use the program that I ran for funneling his students through. And whenever he met, I sort of pressured him on admitting that this young teacher from Europe had been sent. And finally, this person did say, "We just wanted a replacement spiritual community for you." So he actually admitted that this teacher had been sent to me, which I knew, even though the young teacher from Europe denied it. That was part of the beginnings of people needing to continue the deception. It was one of the first ones. And to have this person from the actual organization say to me, "Yes, we just wanted to have a replacement spiritual community for you." That was important for me to hear, and important for me to see a little ray of integrity in there. So after being at this job at the college for about 12 years, it was a job that was sucking every ounce of creativity out of me. I could not last one more minute. And since I couldn't be with somebody. The household finances were on my shoulders, so I felt obligated to be in this job. Even though it was literally painful for me to be in that job. Mentally, emotionally, and physically, actually painful. And I knew if I quit that job that there would be a domino effect. I'd have to sell the house, et cetera, et cetera. Well, so I end up leaving the organization at the request of one of the uppity-ups. Who knows who he is? And I felt fine with that because it was awful to be marginalized, even though people were waking up and realizing what I was carrying. But I had replaced that somewhat with this young teacher from Europe. And so it was a nice transition. So once I left that organization, all of a sudden there was all sorts of services that needed to be done for this young and upcoming teacher. So Seva coming out of my ears. And I'm going to back up just a little bit. There was a meeting in San Jose with a bunch of people that I didn't know, but I was invited. And I go up to this meeting and walk into the apartment. There must have been about eight or 10 people there. I only knew 2 or 3. One was the young teacher from Europe. And I walk in, and the first words that I hear upon entering were, people are meant to be in a relationship, which really broke my heart because I knew I couldn't be in one from what the Advaita teacher had indicated before I left that organization. At the time, I didn't realize the block that had been placed. That will come up in video number 5 or 6. But I walked into those words, and it turns out later that a person was sent to be with me. This was actually indicated by the teacher up north. I won't get off on that tangent right at the moment. So I knew where he was from. I knew that he had actually been sent, even though he denied it also. He later on indicated silently otherwise, which I appreciate. But since this is a rather large story, the people who teeter on stepping into a full integrity around this don't really come forth robustly. So we're both helping out with the young teacher from Europe's organization. not yet an organization, but burgeoning teaching. And he's getting quite a following because he's deeply charismatic, wonderful, and was really a breath of fresh air in many ways to some very standard, basic Advaita teachings. There was, I can't remember the year of this retreat, but there was a retreat up north with this teacher. And right prior to that retreat, the night before going up actually, I received an internal threat that if I let any of this information that I'm holding out, that my life would be in danger. That was right before one of this young teacher's retreats. I went up the next day. I was so shook. It literally impacted my entire system, sent a shockwave through it. And the man who had been sent to be with me understood what had happened. I couldn't even get the words out. And so that threat affected my communications for several years after that. As I was helping this young teacher, there began to be a felt sense of great pressure to move to North Carolina, which I didn't want to do. And the pressure was so great that it felt like it was to get me out of the area, since I knew who sent these guys. Still operating under the authority stuff, I almost felt obligated to move back east to North Carolina. Until one day I was walking out of a satsang, I can't remember who it was I was seeing, but a woman teacher in this area tapped me on my shoulder and asked me how I was. The worst thing to ask Leslie right around this time. And we walked outside and we're standing on the sidewalk. And I told her that I felt all this pressure to move, to be with this teacher, to help out, so-called. It was actually more to be under the control of another organization, another teacher. It wasn't just to replace a spiritual organization. That's a key point. It was mostly for control. So she looked at me point blank and she said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I definitely don't want to leave. I don't want to move my entire household over there and leave my family." And she said, "That no is your yes." Honestly, it was the first time a teacher had given me permission for my own birthright of sovereignty. And it took some time for that to sink in. Coming out of a deeply patriarchal system where there is immense control, and where my life was now under inordinate at control due to information that I was carrying regarding their missteps. So to have somebody tell me that my own no, my own resistance, which many decry, was my yes. It was my birthright. I took a couple months to settle in and to really feel into that. So, not sure what year that was, but around 2011, 2012, 2013, there was various connections with this young teacher and various connections with the Facebook community, which was truly a life raft for me. And there came a point where I had a Skype with the young teacher from Europe, at which he asked me point blank, do you like your job? At which point I said no. And he suggested quitting it. I've always had a lot of trust in the universe that if you jump, you're going to be caught. You'll be carried. So I did. The next day I put in my notice at this college. And after a few days of euphoria from doing that, fear started settling in, and I thought, now what, you know? And then there came the idea to open up a bookstore that I would call Open Space. And I even found the perfect place downtown for it. And since the only remaining spiritual bookstore in that town had closed up shop, there was a void to be filled. So I was actually excited about that. I had run the bookstore at this organization for about 1.5 years, and I had extensive book selling experience in the past. And right around the time when it came to sign the lease of this really sweet space, I pulled back, primarily because I didn't want to be stuck in a 24/7 job of running a bookstore, a new business by myself. So I stopped that whole process, which was rife with miracles. Everything from the perfect place showing up to you name it. I mean, it was truly amazing, the amount of synchronicities that rolled through that whole process. Then I began looking into selling the house that I had raised my kids in, and there was big pushback from the fellow that rented the garage apartment, who was part of this organization. In fact, he threatened to take me to court, even after giving him full legal time span to evacuate the place and charging him probably about half the rent that a normal apartment in that area goes for. So there was, as I was writing up my notes, I was realizing there was definitely pressure to stay there. I feel in many ways it was because it was a place where I could be watched. And so I pushed through, and I ended up selling the place doing all of that on my own, actually with the help of a dear friend in town who to this day I'm grateful for helping me get started on packing. Before I sold the house, a Facebook friend who approached me by saying that she wanted to get together because of a shared namesake, a shared name. Once again, my gut level feeling didn't feel that was sincere in the sense of that being the reason, but I went along with it. And she came out and visited with a friend. As we were standing in the kitchen, and you have to understand that half my life is spent with this organization. So when I speak of something, at that time it was very difficult to not mention the teacher, the teachings, the organization, etc. So I'm speaking to the friend that she brought, and she's standing behind me. And I mention something about the organization. Her friend is about ready to ask me the teacher's name when the namesake friend is standing behind me and she's going like this to indicate to her friend not to let on that she knows him. This also was another indication that there was a rather large community who knows this teacher, who knows what I'm carrying, who knows the cracks that I fell through and the impact of that on this life, and that are going to carry on the deception. So that becomes increasingly clear, and yet I'm still not at the point of calling them out. I'm still not at that point of getting beyond this authority stuff, of calling out the deceptions and the lies, and of really trusting my gut with regard to what's right, and of not accepting beautiful spiritual aphorisms such as in the field beyond right and wrong. Well, for the absolute level, that may be true and right and beautiful. But on the human level, yeah, there is wrong. And lying is one of them. And taking the life of a person due to deceptions is definitely one of them. So I sell the house in the fall of 2013. That was a lot of work. At the 12th hour, I had no idea where I was going. And then the real estate agent sends me a message saying that there was a unpermitted apartment with no kitchen on the east side. So that's where I went. The pod had been packed up by these two genius men. And I had shoved a bunch of stuff in a storage unit. And I left that house that I had been in since 1992. So that gives an idea of the beginnings of my awareness around the upholding of the falsities. The next video is pretty dark stuff. To use the actual words of the partner of my now deceased father, that partner of him is still with this organization. She told me that the word that they used in describing the 2 years that I would spend at this next apartment as compression years. That's probably putting it very mildly. So with that, I'm going to end this before it too gets too long. And see you on the next video. Namaste.